I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is the Tech Central podcast brought to you today by Pinnacle and Dell Technologies. Now, I'm joined for this podcast by two experts in the world of server computing, and that's Pinnacle's Ricky Pereira and Peter van der Merwe. Ricky is the Dell Enterprise Product Manager at Pinnacle, and Peter works with Ricky closely as a pre-sales engineer. Ricky, Peter, welcome. Welcome to the podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Oh, thank you, Duncan. It's doing very well today.
How's it, Duncan?
Great. How's it? Welcome. Thanks for taking the time. Now, we're going to be getting a little bit technical today. We're going to be talking about the new range of Dell EMC PowerEdge servers. These are specifically Dell's 15th generation servers, as I understand it, and they bring big changes and upgrades to previous generation services from Dell Technologies. And we're going to unpack this new 15th generation PowerEdge server platform with Pinnacle today. I'm looking forward to learning more about these servers and what they can do. But first of all, Ricky, let me start with you. These servers run both Intel and AMD chips. So traditional PC servers in various form factors. What's the target market here?
So basically, it's across the board. So you can get it from the entry-level servers all the way up through to your high-end, specialized servers that there's a requirement for the specific application that a customer is looking for. So we've got the range across the board. As I said, you've got the entry levels, you've got a tower option, you've got a rack option, you've got servers that are designed for machine learning and analytics that's purely designed, they can take multiple graphics processing units to assist with doing those analytics and getting that machine learning and understanding those applications. One of the things is as we start going forward, a lot more data is starting to be generated, as they call it, the edge. Dell also has some specialized servers for those requirements as well. And when we're talking about moving in the edge, we're getting things to the case of autonomous driving. So you're going to have to get a car that's busy driving and figuring out where it's going. How does it do that? It's got to basically understand it and do the processing almost at a local level rather than sending it to this big, wonderful cloud that we all heard about, sending all that information to the cloud and then back again. By the time it's figured everything out, it's going to have crashed into something. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, and and obviously the processors and all the rest of it has been designed to improve the performance of the Dell 15th generation servers.
So edge computing, mission critical, of course, if it comes to self-driving cars, for example. But a lot of these servers, I presume, will also be going into data centers and also into on-premises sites for some of the big companies in South Africa.
Correct. And the one benefit with actually moving into the data centers and things like that is these servers are being designed. Some of the key features of how they've been designed is actually improving the airflow within the server and obviously trying to keep it cool. One benefit is that Intel's gone and increased the core counts within these servers. And one of the key new things that have actually introduced on the 15th generation servers is liquid cooling. Now, that was almost the premise of gaming machines and things like that, but now you've actually got high-end infrastructure and data center equipment that gets liquid cooled in order to keep the equipment cool so you don't have to spend that much on air cons within the data center.
I still remember the days of liquid-cooled mainframes, so we've kind of come full circle here, right?
Correct.
But let's tackle the chips in this 15th generation of Dell PowerEdge servers. So it comes in Intel and AMD flavor, the Intel Xeon chips and the AMD Epyc, are they called? AMD Epyc?
Yeah.
Is that the right name? Yeah. But I believe in the South African market in particular, it definitely skews towards Intel. Maybe just take us through what these new generation Intel and AMD chips are bringing to the table.
Basically, the two things that the Intel chips are moving across is it's the increase of the core counts. And one of the benefits, the reason for the increase in the core count is they're actually making the silicon a little bit smaller. So where they've had like a silicon that was 10 nanometers, they're now getting down to the 7 nanometers. So they can actually add more processors as such, which is the cores, into the same size microchip that they've been using all along. So that's the technology that's basically AMD is pushing Intel into, Intel's pushing back. So in order to get that smaller silicon chip, to get more cores onto the CPU, therefore making it a little bit more processor heavier, making it easier to perform the calculations that servers need to do. So that's the one thing that this little war between Intel and AMD has been pushing. Right now, AMD is sort of almost at the forefront, so they've actually got a huge core count on some of their processors. Within their Epyc range, they've got processors that can offer 64 cores. where Intel's starting to get to that level where they're getting to 52 cores within a single processor. So when you're looking at that type of technology, and especially nowadays when people are going more virtual within their environments, you can add more virtual servers for the same size server. You can add more virtual servers onto the environment, and grow your capacity exponentially via that.
And I presume, as these chip companies like Intel go to these more advanced manufacturing nodes from 10 millimeter to 7 nanometer, for instance, it also brings power benefits as well, which is increasingly important, particularly in the South African context, where we've got to make sure that we're using as little electricity as possible. But of course, there's costs involved and environmental impact too. So I imagine we're also looking at power saving efficiencies with this latest generation of Intel chips.
Correct. So obviously, the smaller the processor becomes, the more energy efficient it becomes. And then because it becomes a little bit energy efficient, as I said, with the increase of core counts, yes, there's, the more cores start generating a little bit more heat. But with the new technologies, like I said, liquid cooling, to add it to drop down the temperature when there's a server, you can play around with it. One of the other things that Dell have improved on the 15th generation server is called multi-vector cooling. So they've redesigned the base unit within the server itself, that the airflow from the front through to the back is actually channeled through the heat sinks, cooling down the processes almost from an ambient temperature. So you don't have to worry about making sure that you've got an ice-cold data center within your environment, therefore helping with that energy cost on keeping your air cons at a low temperature. Almost that like a room temperature type scenario, like 23 degrees, you can actually keep that server cool because of the way it's been designed, the airflow from the front of the server to the back of the server, and the way the fans pull that air across. So that also adds into the whole requirement of reducing the energy footprint that everyone's experiencing. And then obviously, like you said, within a South African context, we got to worry about making sure that the server stays up. And when the power's off, most companies will probably have a generator running in the background, as well as other UPSs and inverters. You've got to try and minimize the impact on that. So you don't utilize all your UPS batteries all in one go. The power consumption has to improve and going forward. And that's one of also the thing that Dell does going forward, is to keep things in a sustainable fashion. And they're trying to make sure that they reduce their carbon footprint from the production of the server all the way through to the full life cycle of the server.
Yeah. Memory and storage, Ricky, tell us a bit about what's new there.
So within the memory components, it's actually improved the amount of capacity that the memory can actually take. So again, with the improvement of the CPUs between Intel and AMD, more memory can be added within the environment. And to help that is that on the 15th gen servers, they've actually increased the memory slot counts, especially on the dual socket servers. So you can actually add more memory. So it's almost that the process is now outstripping the memory capacity or the memory module capacity that you can actually put into the servers. So you can almost get, each processor can take up to 4 to 6 terabytes of memory per processor. But the server doesn't have enough slots unless you start adding bigger and bigger memory modules. So inadvertently, both processor manufacturers are pushing the memory manufacturers to increase their capacity. So therefore, you start increasing the amount of memory that you can actually have on the servers. So that was also one of the benefits that Dell have thought about this. And so they've increased the number of slots within the 15th generation server in order to facilitate that. And then obviously also provide some future growth within the environment. So once you get to the larger memory modules, you've got extra capacity anyway.
Yes. Okay. Great stuff. So there are advances in other areas as well, of course. I think one you mentioned to me in our pre-discussion was networking and faster connectivity through new network controllers. Take us through that. So
on the Dell servers, on the 15th gen servers, right now, everything's sort of, the standard is 10 gig. That used to be the 1 gig go back a couple of years ago, or quite a number of years ago. 10 gig was new on the block. Now 10 gigs is standard. And 10 gigs almost getting pushed out to 25 gig is becoming the standard networking connectivity. And obviously how switches and networking are increasing exponentially, where now you're actually getting to switches that can provide 400 gig network connectivity per port. So the servers are catching up to that. So you're actually putting that within the environment as well. So you can actually go and take your server and connect it up to a 400 gig switch, or vice versa. You can have a 400 gig switch connecting to 4 servers at 100 gig. therefore improving that connectivity between your core network to the server and then obviously the flow back again, reducing your latency and your lead time of getting the information to your applications, doing the processing, and getting that information back to everyone's cloud.
Which must be really important as more and more companies move to the cloud and a lot of their applications are moved off premises into cloud data centers. Getting that latency down and the network speed up is absolutely critical, right?
Correct. The latency should still be there if you move into the cloud, because remember, you still got to travel to there. But once you're there, you need to get that information in and out as fast as possible. So in order to reduce the local latency, to counteract the latency of moving that information into the cloud. So with the guys moving into a cloud data center or a hosted environment, in that sense, the guys do need that internal transfer rate so they can get that information internally. And then that sort of counteract the latency that the guys will experience getting through the cloud back down to their local machines. So they're pushing the data center technology further in order to mitigate some of that latency you will experience by moving your workloads into the cloud. But then again, if you keep it onto a private cloud, which is some of the technology that you are looking at, and that's sort of the next step that a lot of companies are doing. They're doing that hybrid cloud or actually multi-cloud type solutions, is that they'll still have a cloud solution on-premise, utilizing the 15th generation servers that almost do have that sort of design and functionality built into it, especially with the lifecycle and managing the server itself. You can almost move that information into public cloud and then back again. So that becomes a bit more design intensive, and the applications that you're going to be utilizing in order to move that data from one location to another.
And of course, RAID controllers play a big role there around storage, and I believe there have been some upgrades on that front too. Just take us through what the 15th Gen PowerEdge servers offer in that regard, Ricky.
So the RAID controller has also been an upgrade. So as technology has been improving, they're basically getting that internal transfer rate from your internal disks through the RAID controller, making sure that the technology keeps the RAID in place. The way it actually writes the information across the disks, they've been able to improve on the speed within the RAID controller itself, and also improve the cache, what they call is the cache or the battery backup. So where the information is being written very quickly from the processor to the memory, your sort of gap or your roadblock is actually going to be your hard drives, because they're not catching up, they're not keeping up to the speed. So the bigger the cache on your RAID controller, the more information it can store while it trickles it through to your hard drives. But yes, they're improving the throughput from the RAID controller to they're improving hard drives, and even though SSDs and things like that, they're trying to improve the information across. You're still going to have that sort of bottleneck between the processor and your hard drives to get that information across. And the other benefit is also you need to worry about your redundancy or your fault tolerance within your drives. And the newer RAID controllers are actually able to configure that in a much better system.
I was interested in what you said earlier about liquid cooling in these devices, because that's obviously, as you mentioned, something that you expect PC gamers to do. Certainly when you go to these gaming expos, you see these amazing PCs that have been built with RGB colors everywhere and colored water flowing through over the motherboard and through the PC to keep the components cool. It's not something you normally associate with PC servers. I'm guessing we're not going to see RGB lights across data centers going forward, but it's a similar sort of concept. I mean, are we actually going to see water flowing in data center racks going forward?
So, yeah, I'd be surprised. I don't think it's too far off of guys starting to do RGB colors within the data center. So that might happen.
It would make them look more interesting for sure.
It's like you say, okay, that red rack, or it's not the green one. Guys can figure out that way.
Yeah.
But no, so the technology is there. So the way that basically the system works is that the heat sinks are now plugged in with an actual water cooler that with a couple of pipes. Those pipes are fed through the server. They're quite robust and quite tough. They're fed through the server and out into the rack unit within the data center. And then that rack unit's actually plugged into a recycling sort of almost think of it like a car radiator. Very similar type to technologies, where that radiator sits closer to the aircon, so that's got air flowing through it, cooling down the water, and it's basically just passing that cool water over the processor and taking the hot water, as I say, back out through the radiator and so on and so forth. So the technology is very similar to the normal car radiator, where you got a fan basically putting it in, water going in, cooling the engine, coming back out. So it's the same sort of theory. Also, it's not just normal water; it's also that sort of cooled, liquid-cooled type water that you can put into your radiator. So that's how the system will work. So yes, you do need to sort of put that radiator or that functionality within your rack and within your data center. But as you start looking at trying to reduce the cost within your normal data center, that's something that guys can look at.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll have an impact on your need to run other forms of cooling, such as air conditioning in large data centers as well.
Correct.
Right. So I believe that this 15th gen also offers some advances in the automation of configurations, making these servers easier to deploy. Am I throwing the rugby ball your way yet, Peter, or is this another one for Ricky?
Yeah, carry on. Ricky's on the roll, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all yours, Ricky.
So when you're looking at the management of the server and things like that, Dell have improved the way, as I call it, the lifecycle management of the server. So from boot up all the way through to decommissioning. Mm-hmm. So they've actually added one of the best tools that Dell do have. Other vendors have their own, but it's the iDRAC. So it's the Dell Remote Access Controller Unit. That's almost like a separate PC that sits on your server motherboard that's used just to monitor and view how your server is operating, and to the point where you can play around with it and see where you can also do what they call a zero-touch implementation. So yes, you still need someone to go physically into the data center or the location, do the racking and stacking, plug in the power supply, and then plug in the network cable into the iDRAC, and as well as the server proper. Once that's done, you can log into the iDRAC and basically, as if you were standing next to the server with a little trolley with the VGA port plugged into the VGA port of the keyboard and mouse, you can do all that administration remotely. And over and above that is that then you can actually also deploy the server remotely. So you don't need someone physically on site sitting in the middle of a data center till who knows what hours. Someone can actually go do this from home. And obviously with the last couple of years, we've had to do a lot of work from home type scenario. So that's sort of the focus that the guys have been looked at and put in the benefits. And one of the other things because of the iDRAC scenario, Dell have also got this solution called Support Assist. In essence, what this does is it's sort of a phone home feature. So you can configure your iDRAC in order to do that, and you can pick, and the server will get monitored 24/7. If this system basically picks up that, just a quick example, there's a smart error on one of the hard drives, can pick up that drive is going to fail sometime in the near future. That will automatically log a call with Dell. Dell Tech Support will then come down and resolve it. And then, like I said, that's something that we can actually look at. And like I said, back to the iDRAC, is that at the iDRAC, you can take the whole server all the way to a point where you can actually decommission the server. So you can actually wipe the operating system, you can wipe all the configuration information, and there's a little button that says decommission the server, and it will actually wipe everything, including the iDRAC and the licenses behind that, making that server completely dead.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. If you're deploying one or two servers, it's not really an issue. But if you're an administrator who has to deploy 100 servers, this is going to save you a huge amount of time.
And it also helps with the multinational companies, where the guys will be shipping servers all over the place, and then they've got specific teams that actually go in, and all specific applications that the guys need to do. So it's a great tool to actually log into the server and then do their application. If they need to reboot the server, you don't have to worry about I have been in that experience where I've gone and you're busy clicking and you're supposed to be clicking on log out, but you ultimately click on shut down and the server shuts down. A couple of us have experienced that. So, just too quick to click, should I say. And with using iDRAC, if that does happen, you can at least get back into the server.
Right. Okay. Peter, before we come to you, I just want one last question for Ricky, and it's around security. I Interesting to read about UEFI secure boot. It's something I didn't really understand until Windows 11 came out not so long ago, and my PC had to have a BIOS update, and I learned all about why Windows and Microsoft were enforcing UEFI secure boot on Windows 11 computers, and why this is supposedly improved security, etc. But there's UEFI. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Yeah. Secure boot is one element of many elements that Dell is offering in its new PowerEdge servers from a security perspective. Do you want to take us through some of the other ones like trusted BIOS, firmware chain of trust, verified OS bootloader, etc.?
So, when you're looking at security, the one benefit from the Dell technology do offer, it's called intrinsic security. So they build it from the start, from the ground up. It's not a bolt-on,
right?
As in when something is needed. They make sure that whatever they put into the server from the start, they actually put security in it. They ensure that the supply chain is not tampered with. Once they actually get to the actual hardware within the server itself, yes, they've got multiple things, like the TPM chip. One of the things is that now, with Windows 2022, you're going to need that trusted platform management chip in order to secure your environment. The other thing that also does is to ensure that the traffic between your processor and your memory and your hard drives is all encrypted within an internal perspective.
Yeah.
So it doesn't allow a hacker to, as I said, although Dell's trying to make it easier to administer the server remotely, that also, in theory, it also opens up the ability for someone to actually access the server to do some malicious intent. Mm-hmm. But if everything's secured up front and everything's encrypted, it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull that sort of information out of the server. Yeah, so the other things that also within the server is that you can actually get encrypted hard drives, and then the RAID controller is able to utilize those encrypted hard drives so someone can't just pull out a hard drive and go read the data. That secures the information. But back into the other question, another point within the Dell RAID controller, it's able to RAID those encrypted drives and make sure that the information across is shared across those drives. So you don't so you get that redundancy available. So if a drive does fail, you can plug in another encrypted drive and it will rebuild that drive. Where in the old days, if you lost an encrypted drive, it became it was more like, okay, let's replace everything, rebuild the RAID, and then restore from backup. So it became a little bit the technology helps a little bit better, and although they're securing everything and making sure it's harder to gain access, vice versa, they're also trying to make sure it's easier to administer in the long run.
Understood. TPM, Trusted Computing.
That's Trusted Platform Module.
TPM, Trusted Platform Module. Yeah, that's what I had to enable for Windows. That's what I had to enable anyway to get Windows 11 to install. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to happen. It was quite a learning curve trying to figure out how to do that in my BIOS settings. But yeah, very interesting on in terms of the security around these things, particularly around making sure the product hasn't been tampered with from the factory, which I guess is a worry for many companies these days, given corporate espionage and other stuff that's going on. Right, Peter, are you ready?
Yeah,
I'm going to give you carte blanche now to talk in broad terms about the support and services that Dell offers to their customers around these servers and more broadly, of course.
Okay, so what I personally have had some experience working with some other vendors, and one thing that puts Dell leaps and bounds ahead of any other competition is the support that they sell. A lot of other vendors use third-party companies to manage their support services, and the issue with that is your level of support will vary in your region or who the company is that they are using. With Dell, however, everything is run by, is controlled by Dell. So they've got their own engineers, their own guys that do implementation, that kind of thing. And the level of support that you get from them is spec'd when you buy the machines. It goes from basic, you've got basic, it's then Pro Support and Pro Support Plus. And as the value increases throughout those levels, the support level does as well. Basic hardware support is normally just next business day support that most companies offer. Then you've got Pro Support. Pro Support is you can go up to mission critical, which would be you'll get a result within 4 hours. And then your Pro Support Plus, you can even spec different applications and that kind of things that will also be supported. So if you've got, for example, Microsoft running on your server and you've got an issue with Microsoft, you can have that be part of your support package. The same thing that Ricky was discussing earlier about the remote management that Dell offers. With the deployment, you can spec deployment up until the point where that management module can take over. So you never have to see the server. You can literally have it installed in your rack, and we can set it up to the point where you can take over from there and just configure it from there with iDRAC. So,
interesting. So forget software as a service. This is servers as a service, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So, Ricky, I guess the ball back to Ricky. I wanted to ask you about why companies should consider buying Dell PowerEdge servers over. There's lots of competition out there. Why buy Dell over something?
Well, like Peter alluded to, there's a lot of competition, and everyone sort of, the insides of a server is relatively the same. They're all running off Intel chips. They've all got running off memory. They've all got hard drives. So the insides are still pretty much the same. The benefit from going with a Dell technology solution is the after-sales service, as Peter mentioned. That's almost on a par, bar none. So no one's really got the same sort of service levels across the board with any of the other OEM vendors. They might try, but I think the practice from a Dell technology perspective is top-notch. Over and above that is also the technology that the Dell is putting into their servers. It's slightly different. Like I said, it's the technology they put into the RAID controllers. It's that multi-vector cooling to try to reduce the ambient temperature within the server itself. The using of the power supplies and trying to reduce the power usage within the server itself. So there's a lot of little tricks that they're busy adding to that in order to make that server perform better and, add more bang to the customer's buck. So they want to make sure that they put whatever they buy sort of up front. And that's also the benefit that Dell do, is they give you a clear price up front. So they'll say, okay, if you go buying a server, you want mission critical support for 3 years, here's your cost. It's not here's the server cost. Oh, you want support with it. Here's an additional cost. Here's an additional line item. Here's an additional line item, and so on and so forth. Where suddenly, yes, the server might have been cheaper, but after the long run and adding all those other services, it becomes a little bit more expensive, and so on and so forth. Sure. So that's one of the things that Dell do, is that it's a clear price up front. And they've also got other technologies and things like that you can look at. And one of the other benefits is looking at the Dell partner program. So within their partner base, there's a lot of things that the guys can actually utilize, like the future-proof program. That's something that Dell offer. A lot of the people need to understand that, but like I said, it's clear price. There's certain guarantees that they offer within the environment, but as long as it's planned up front, should I say.
Okay. All right. Great. I think we'll wrap it there, gents. If anyone wants to know any more, I mean, you as Pinnacle, as a distributor, you work through a network of resellers and agents, right? If anyone wants to learn more about Dell PowerEdge servers and how they can get them for their businesses, or if you're a reseller, what's the best way of reaching the team at Pinnacle?
Not a problem. So the quickest way for most of the resellers is obviously to speak to their direct account manager. But if they don't, like I said, if they want more of a direct path, they're happy to contact myself or Peter on an email address called dellsolutions@pinnacle.co.za. You can probably poke that up when on the webcast. So they're happy to contact us directly on that, and then we can have the discussion and ask them what, there's certain questions when you're asking to build a solution, and we can have the engagement and also give them a little bit more information of what they, any questions that they might have.
Might have, yeah. Great. That email address is dellsolutions@pinnacle.co.za.
Correct.
Is that right? Excellent. Well, Ricky Pereira is Dell Enterprise Product Manager, and Peter van der Merwe is Pre-Sales Engineer, both at Pinnacle. Thanks so much for the informative discussion.
Cool. Thank you, Duncan.